Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Battlefield 6 just got another major update, as many of you are probably aware, and as we do in this channel, I'm going to break it down focusing on the major points relevant for casual players. So as many of us know, the major headlines to this update bring back Wake Island, add 2 new fighter jets, introduce a completely new aerial game mode, expands Sewer Reef, and brings back carrier assault in the new form. But there are also a ton of smaller gameplay and quality of life changes that are probably going to matter more to the average player than some of the headline features. And there's one change in particular that could make flying jets much more approachable if, like me, you're not exactly a battlefield pilot. So in this video, I'm going to go through the biggest changes from the perspective of someone who only gets a few hours a week to play. So let's jump into it. Let's start with the obvious one. Battlefield 6 has teamed up with Top Gun for the new Top Gun event, and this is arguably the biggest update we've gotten since the start of Season 4. The event adds 2 new fighter jets, a new game mode called Carrier Strike, a new Red Sec mode called Fighter Sweep, new event challenges and rewards, and of course the return of Wake Island. So there's quite a bit here, but the question I really cared about was, is any of this actually worth your limited gaming time? And I think the answer is partially yes, although some of these parts of the update are definitely more superficial than others. So let's dive into some of those in more specific detail. So focusing on the maps now, in my last video I did a guide on the new Wake Island map, so I'm going to skip over those details. And if you thought Sewer Reef was already big enough, apparently Battlefield didn't agree. So Sewer Reef has now been expanded to include playable aircraft carriers, and the carriers will appear as part of the environment in Conquest and Escalation, while the full carrier gameplay is reserved for the new Carrier Strike mode. And I think this is actually a pretty good addition to Sewer Reef. One of my biggest criticisms when I reviewed Season 4 was that the map sometimes felt too large, which I know is kind of a contentious opinion. People have strong opinions about that. So adding even more space might sound like the opposite of what I was actually wanting, but the aircraft carriers actually give that space more purpose and some more interesting playable moments. Instead of just having a giant amount of water separating all these different parts of the maps, you now get another area that can actually become part of the fight. So I'll be interested to see whether this makes Sewer Reef feel more dynamic rather than simply making it larger. And that's something I'll probably need a little more time with before I can give an actual final verdict of my own opinion. The biggest new gameplay addition is the Top Gun Carrier Strike, and this is essentially a reimagining of Carrier Assault from previous Battlefield games. The basic idea is pretty straightforward. You've got infantry, naval units, and aircraft all working together to destroy the enemy aircraft carrier. Ground forces need to push forward and secure the path, naval units provide the support, and the pilots are fighting for control of the skies. Eventually you need to get into the opposing carrier and destroy it, and this is exactly the kind of mode where Battlefield's combined arms gameplay can really shine. You've got all the different parts of Battlefield happening at the same time instead of just having jets off doing their own thing while everyone else fights on the ground. At least on paper, this is probably the most exciting addition for me in this update. The big question is going to be whether the mode actually keeps all of those different elements balanced, because if the aircraft dominates or if the infantry portion becomes a bottleneck, the whole thing can fall apart pretty quickly. I've only played a few rounds so far, and I've already experienced this lopsided matches where we just either get dominated or we completely dominate, and there seems to be some balance tweaking that needs to really happen here. Now let's talk about what might actually be the biggest change in this update for casual players in terms of gameplay, and that's aircraft control assist. So Battlefield is adding a new assisted aircraft control option designed to make flying jets more approachable, and basically the game will help guide the aircraft towards the center of your camera while automatically managing things like pitch, roll, and yaw. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking, that's not how you're supposed to fly a jet, and that's fine. If you're already an experienced pilot, you're probably going to want the traditional controls anyways. But for someone who only plays a few hours a week and you may not fly jets very often, this could be a really big deal. One of the biggest barriers to getting into Battlefield aircraft is simply the learning curve. You can spend an entire match trying to figure out how to stay in the air while someone who's been flying for hundreds of hours is basically treating you like target practice. And that's not particularly welcoming, at least from my experience. So if this new control option can get a casual player into the air and actually feeling like they're contributing, I think that's a really good thing. And importantly, it doesn't mean you have to use it. It's an alternative control option. So experienced pilots can continue using the traditional controls, while newer players have a way to ease themselves into flying. So for a game that wants casual players to experience more Battlefield sandbox, I think this is one of the smartest additions in this update. And if you're going to try to make flying more approachable, it just makes sense to add some new aircraft. So in this update, we get 2 new 2-seater fighter jets, the FA-81F Super Spectre and the F-74A Seacat. Both are designed around having a pilot and a wingman, so instead of one player having to manage everything, you can actually bring a friend along and work together. And again, I think this is a really good fit for casual players. If you have a friend who's better at flying than you are, you can actually get in the same aircraft and learn together rather than having to figure everything out completely on your own. The Seacat also has variable sweep wings, so there are some differences between the two aircraft, but I'm not going to get too deep into the individual stats here. For the average player, the important thing is there are now more ways to get in the air and actually participate in aerial combat. And with the new assisted controls, this feels like a pretty intentional attempt to make that part of Battlefield more accessible. Now switching gears more towards the gunplay and gun updates, we of course have the new weapon, the Interdictor Sniper Rifle. This is being described as the longest range sniper rifle in Battlefield 6, and apparently it's designed for extreme distance engagements, including the ability to target exposed pilots inside aircraft. So if you're a sniper player, this is obviously one you'll want to work towards. There's also an additional feature in the settings menu that I think casual players should at least know about, and it's called the ADS Dispersion Crosshair, and this one is actually pretty interesting. When you're aiming down sights and firing on automatic weapons, the indicator shows you how much your weapon is spreading. As you fire, the shape gets larger to show that your weapon is becoming less accurate. It can also show how your movement is affecting your accuracy. And I actually think this could be a really useful learning tool, especially if you've ever had one of those situations where you're thinking, why am I missing all these shots? I'm literally aiming right at this guy. Well, weapon dispersion may be a part of that answer, and this indicator is enabled by default in firing range, but you can also enable it in multiplayer through the HUD and crosshair settings. You can even adjust the opacity and the color. So personally, I think this is exactly the kind of optional feature that makes sense. If you don't want it, turn it off. But if you're trying to improve your gunplay, if it gives you some visual feedback about what's actually happening to your weapon's accuracy, go ahead and turn it on and see if it helps you. Now switching over to vehicles and anti-air changes, there are also a pretty significant number of vehicle changes in this update. And again, I'm going to skip over a lot of the tiny technical fixes and focus on the things you're actually likely to notice. So first, the jet landing gear physics have been improved. There are also a number of changes to jet projectiles, lock-on rockets, laser designation, and countermeasures. One change I particularly like is that there's now a score event when you force an enemy aircraft to deploy countermeasures. So if you're using anti-air and successfully pressure a jet into using its flares, the game actually gives you feedback that you did something useful. That's a small change, but I do think it's important. Because if you're a casual player using an anti-air gadget, it can sometimes feel like you're accomplishing absolutely nothing when the aircraft escapes. Now you at least get some indication that you actually forced the pilot to react. Missiles also react more quickly to countermeasures, which should make that interaction more consistent. And the RCB-90 patrol boat has received several fixes to its missiles, lock-on warnings, flares, and laser designation. So overall, it looks like DICE is continuing to clean up the interaction between aircraft, boats, and anti-air equipment, rather than making one specific vehicle type completely dominant. So I think these are all positive changes. One additional change that I think everyone's going to be excited about, because I've seen it in the comments, is that the vehicle pings is apparently fixed. Now, I haven't tested this directly, so I can't confirm, but this is a huge, easy win. When you ping from a vehicle, the ping will now appear where you're actually aiming instead of directly in front of the vehicle. This is one of those changes that sounds incredibly minor when you read it in patch notes, but if you spent any time trying to communicate with your squad from a vehicle recently, you know how annoying it was when your ping wasn't actually going where you were looking. So this is exactly the kind of quality of life change that I think matters more to casual players than some of the more complicated balance changes. Audio has also received quite a bit of attention. So the jet audio has been improved in both first and third person, including more reactive engine and airframe sounds, dynamic wind effects, and additional afterburner audio. Underwater audio has also been polished with smoother transitions when moving between above and underwater gameplay, and first person sounds have been added when your vehicle enters the water. These aren't necessarily changes that you're going to see advertised on a big Season 4 style trailer, but the audio is one of those things that can make Battlefield feel significantly better when it's working properly. So I'm definitely interested in seeing how noticeable these changes are after spending some more time with the update. Now there are a few other smaller changes worth mentioning that I won't go into great detail, and that's spawn locations on numerous maps have been updated to fix several bugs and unintended rooftop access. Defibrillator charges now fully replenish while swimming. Tracer darts now work correctly with lock-on launchers. There are improvements to underwater movement and animations. The game should also do a better job of preventing players from getting stuck or being eliminated through walls. And the Battle Pass, challenges, and reward menus have received some presentation improvements to make progression and locked rewards easier to understand. None of these are game-changing on their own, but that's really the theme of this update. There's a lot of polish here and nothing super big that stands out dramatically. And lastly, if you're someone who loves RedSec, there's a brand new point of interest on Fort Linden. It's called the USS Grant. It's essentially a crashed aircraft carrier sitting off the coast. It's a high-value area with better loot than standard POIs, and for the first few weeks, it's going to be marked as a high-value zone. So if you're playing Battle Royale, this is obviously somewhere you'll want to keep an eye on. The downside is that everyone else knows the same thing, so expect this place to be pretty busy. So after going through all those details, what actually matters is if you're someone who only has a few hours a week to play Battlefield. So I'd boil it down to about 5 things. Number 1, Wake Island. It's back and it's probably the easiest new content to recommend. If you enjoy classic Battlefield combined arms gameplay, definitely give it a shot. Number 2 is Carrier Strike. This is probably the update's biggest question mark for me. The concept sounds fantastic, and if the balance between infantry, naval, and air combat works, this could be one of the best modes in the game. Number 3 is Aircraft Control Assist. If you've avoided jets because you can't fly them, give this a shot and see if it helps you. Number 4 is the ADS Dispersion Crosshair. If you're trying to improve your gunplay, turn this on and experiment with it. It could help you understand why your weapon isn't as accurate as you think it is. And finally, number 5, all of the little reliability fixes. Better spawns, fewer map exploits, improved vehicle interactions, better underwater transitions, better audio, and fewer weird visual and animation issues. None of these are particularly exciting, but they're exactly the kind of things that make the game feel better over time. So overall, I actually think this is a pretty strong update for Battlefield 6, not necessarily because every individual change is massive and important. It's because there's a good combination of new content and quality of life improvements, and I hope we continue to see these type of updates moving into Season 5. So as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribe if you want to see more. Be sure to spread some positivity, and I'll see you in the next one.